Hi, everyone. My name is Peyton, and tonight joining me is Stephanie Beerson. I'm going to give a few minutes for everyone to log on still. I know we have some joining and the numbers going up, which is great. But I just wanted to give a quick introduction of myself, and then I'll let Stephanie take over and tell you everything she has. So if you are joining from the career fair, you already know a little bit about me. I am Practice Match's physician ambassador program coordinator. I do all of that with the ambassadors, letting them, making sure that they, participate in the fairs. Also, while earning an additional income through Practice Match. So, if you're interested in that, I will be emailing you all after this webinar tonight with the information and Stephanie's information as well. So, Stephanie, if you want to take it away, we have a good crowd going whenever you're ready.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go right into the talk. As I mentioned to Peyton before you guys joined, oddly, our building manager told me that our electricity is getting shut off in exactly an hour for maintenance. In the event that we run out of time or I lose my electricity, Peyton and I have figured out a way to get all questions answered later. It just may be in email form.
And before you do begin, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end of her presentation. And this will be recorded as well and posted on our website within the end of the week if you guys ever want to go back and look at it.
So hi, everybody. I'm not sure how many OBGYNs are on this webinar, but anybody who's done their L&D rotation, a slide like this should make your heart beat just a little bit fast. I was covering labor and delivery and got called down to do a precipitous delivery. Typically, when that's happening, if a patient is not super calm, I will actually step back and say, look, have the baby and I'll fix the carnage. Unfortunately, my patient got to the hospital complete, didn't get an epidural. They do call it labor, not a walk in the park. And so she was not very cooperative. I had 6 nurses in the room helping me get her in the proper position. And unfortunately, I looked down and the baby's heart rate was similar to this strip. And I knew that I had to get the baby out. And while I was putting the vacuum on, I'm sorry, guys, this is really fast and I don't know why. I am going to, guys, I'm really sorry. This has never happened before. All right, guess what? I'm going to stop sharing this one and share a different one. I'm really sorry, guys. I am embarrassed. Okay. Take 2. So as I was putting the vacuum on the baby's head to help guide it out, I ended up getting kicked. The first kick came straight to my brachial plexus. My arm went numb. I thought I was doing myself a favor by turning my body. And unfortunately, as I got the widest part of the baby's abdomen out, she actually kicked me again. And this time it came across my shoulder. And she actually ended up pushing 2 of my nurses against a wall and managed to ruin 3 people's careers in one moment. I knew that something was wrong. I was able to finish the delivery. I had to call down one of my partners to finish. And I ended up with a torn labrum in my left shoulder. My first orthopedist, in not so many words, told me that professional baseball pitchers pitched with torn labrums, so I should surely be able to do my job. He called me a name. I did what most type A physicians do. I put my head down, I continued working, I figured out how to compensate, and then one day I couldn't compensate anymore. I ended up with a frozen shoulder. I was doing a C-section on a patient that had pushed for quite some time. My first assist had never done a C-section before, and I could not get my left arm to do what it needed to do to get this baby out. And I ended up calling in one of my partners, and thankfully it was during the day, because had it been at night, I would have had to tee up her uterus and make her what we call an obstetric invalid, and it really would have been my fault. And I that day said, I'm done. This is not ethical. This is not the surgeon I am. It's not the doctor that I am. I went on to have surgery. It didn't quite go as planned. I woke up getting told that it looked like a bomb went off in my shoulder. I was not cleared to do OB or operate. And unfortunately, while this talk is not about contracts, turns out that my contract said I needed to be able to do 100% of my job, and I was unceremoniously terminated the day that my FMLA was up. And I learned a lot the hard way about insurances. My group policy didn't cover work-related injuries. I was told I would have been better off had I fallen off my bike. And then Workman's Comp turned around and they denied my claim because they said while an injury occurred, my frozen shoulder was my fault or idiopathic. And so I ended up having to sue for that. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. But what ended up happening was I became incredibly passionate about this topic and felt as though I had made some decisions and mistakes really out of sheer ignorance. And I started lecturing about the topic of disability insurance around Philadelphia, and residents started asking for my help. So full disclosure, I have become an insurance broker. I have co-founded a company that focuses on education and empowerment of young physicians to understand disability and life insurance. And so they started asking for my help. My husband said, hey, maybe this is what your next stage is. And so here we go. Interesting thing about Workman's Comp is that it varies from state to state. And as I mentioned, I was initially denied. A 14-month lawsuit followed where I had 3 appearances in court. I had never been to court as an obstetrician before. And I will tell you that one of the appearances, I ended up a puddle of tears. They had a vocational specialist who said that I could be a billing secretary because I had the aptitude to learn codes. I am sure that no one here is going what they're going through to end up being a billing secretary. And I will admit that we ended up settling because honestly, I wasn't in a very good headspace at the time, and I really wanted to get on with my life. So the one thing I will point out, or I guess 2 things. Number one, it is definitely worth the time and money to have a lawyer look at your contracts so that you know exactly what you're signing up to do or not do, and to look into what your state's Workman's Comp is. I will tell you at the time in Pennsylvania, they didn't even recognize 6-figure incomes, and they maxed out at $3,500 a month. And I was making more than that a week. When we talk about disability insurance, we're really talking about 2 different things. There are employer benefits and private benefits, and group benefits and private benefits. Group benefits come in 2 flavors. You have employer benefits and association benefits. I don't spend a lot of time talking about association benefits, the AMA, the American Academy of fill in the blank. Those policies are being blessed because somebody's paying to have them be blessed. They are really not in our best interest. When it comes to employer benefits, right? So you're working wherever you are, and your employer is either giving you a policy that's built in to your contract and they're paying for it, or they can say, well, we have it, but it's voluntary and you have to pay for it. There are three things that we run into with employer group benefits where they are inferior to a private policy. And it really comes down to taxation, ownership, and language. When we talk about taxation, if your employer is paying for your policy, any money that you would receive from that benefit would actually be considered taxable income. Now, on the rare occurrence that you're paying for a group benefit, it would be tax-free, similarly to an individual disability policy. Taxation, big deal, right? Tax-free money is a lot better than taxable money. Now, ownership is interesting. Whether it is employer paid or an employee paid group benefit, the employer owns the policy. They create it, they control it, and more often than not, they keep it, meaning it's employment dependent. So once you change jobs, whatever benefits you were getting from your employer tend to stay with them. Now, like everything else in medicine, there are exceptions to the rule. I'm speaking to kind of what's the most common. With a private individual disability policy, you own it. You get to help create it. You control it. You keep it. The goal is to get one policy when you're young, and it's going to stay with you for the entirety of your career. This is probably the most important slide in the entire talk. There is no standardization of language in insurance. It is infuriating. Companies can use the same phrases and define them differently, or they can use different phrases and define them similarly. Additionally, the same carrier, if they have a group benefit and a private benefit, they may not match. And this is where things get super confusing. Personally, I think it's on purpose. I think they want lay people to be confused. And so it's really important that you're paying attention to the details and the fine print, because oftentimes when we look at a group policy and see what are they really covering, what do the definitions really mean, we find lots of holes. And I am often in an unenviable position of telling people that what they thought they had is not actually what they had. Focusing on, again, the group side, oftentimes we'll find that there are things hidden, for lack of better phrasing. It tends to be one line on our open enrollment packet. You check a box and you move on. A lot of times what we think the amount is that we're getting is not the exact amount that we're getting. Oftentimes it'll say that they're covering 50 or 60% of your base income, and there's often a maximum benefit. So I have seen benefits ranging from $1,000 a month to $35,000 a month. So the range is crazy. And you have to pay attention to, does it say your base? Does it say your full income? Especially in academic centers, people get paid in kind of different buckets. You're going to have a base salary, then you may have an educational piece, you may have an RVU piece, you may have a call piece. you want to make sure that everything gets covered. We can do that on the private side. They don't necessarily do that on the group side. Additionally, they will often say that their own occupation. However, if you read the details, it may be own occupation for a couple of years and then switch to any occupation, or the way that they define own occupation is what's called held to the national economy or the local labor market. It is not specific to what one employee does at one employer site. That allows them to cast a really wide net that says this is what you would, could, should be able to do based on your training, education, and skill set. It's not ideal. And most importantly, the way that they often define total disability is that you're considered totally disabled in the event that you cannot do your job as they've defined it and not be gainfully employed. I will tell you, I used to say the old adage that I would give my left arm to be home with my boys more. Turns out I gave my left arm to be home with my boys more. And after 6 weeks, I was ready to kill everybody. Most of us are not hardwired to be at home and not working. I have the utmost respect for stay-at-home parents. I am not a good one. My children are way better with me as a parent going out and working. I have done a ton of disabled physician outreach work, and it is amazing what disabled physicians have managed to find. One, to be productive members of society, to just get out of the house. And so you want to make sure with a private policy that the definition reads, you're considered totally disabled in the event that you cannot do your job, and we'll get into that definition, but regardless if you're gainfully employed in another occupation, you want to be able to figure out what your next chapter is. You don't want somebody else telling you that. As far as other nuances, since COVID, we are seeing a lot of group benefits that have that exclusion of not only work-related injuries, but also work-related illnesses, which I think is a slippery slope. I'm not sure how we're supposed to prove where we've contracted illnesses from. I have started to see limitations, meaning that they're going to only pay for a certain period of time for musculoskeletal issues, which, by the way, is the #1 reason that physicians leave practice. And we're seeing a lot of companies that are putting a 2-year limit on those. Most group benefits have a 2-year mental health benefit. We also have been seeing an uptick in what carriers are calling subjective illnesses. So including but not limited to fatigue, pain, ringing in the ears, things where you may not have a pathognomonic test, but you have the symptomatology. And all of those, they're limiting to 2 years. And very often, we just don't know. And we don't know what we don't know, right? You have to actually ask HR departments for a master copy of their group benefit. And these benefits can be over 100 pages long, and they're full of legalese. You really want to go over it with somebody who is used to looking at these products. So that brings us to the crux of tonight's talk, which is, why is a private policy so important? As I mentioned before, terminology, language is so important. And these are all of the pieces of the puzzle that you can help create a quality policy. And I'm going to go through each of these. I put up specialty specific instead of own occupation because there are lots of phrases being used. Currently, there are 6 companies that cater to the physician marketplace and offer truly specialty specific coverage, which goes back to that definition of you're considered totally disabled if you can't do what you do, how you do it, when you do it, regardless if you're gainfully employed in another occupation. As of May 1st of this year, one of the companies is stepping away from the individual space. So we're going to have 5. And interestingly, 2 of the carriers have changed their product design within the last 2 months. And we have until the end of this month to show the old policies. So even this list is going to change a month from now. All of these, except the bottommost one, are truly specialty specific. What the carriers will do at the time of a claim. So you're calling and saying, hey, Steph, something happened. I can't do my job. They will pull your billing and your calendar for the last 2 to 3 years leading up to a claim to actually dictate what your job is. What are you doing to make money? How long are you working? What can you not do now based on your treating physician? Now, admittedly, one of the mistakes that I made, one of my policies has that last phrase, a transitional occupation language. What that does is add a phrase to the end of that statement and says, until you reach your pre-disability earnings. And you may be thinking, well, if disability insurance is supposed to be income protection, wouldn't everybody want that definition? Why would it matter? Well, think about it. You don't want to be held to your resident or fellowship income. I wasn't at my maximum earning potential. Now, I was 10 years out. So if I can make what I made then, would it be okay that I don't get my disability policy? Sure, but it's not what I thought I bought. And this goes back to, you want to make sure that you're getting properly educated and advocated for. This is the most important thing in a private policy. Then we start looking at, okay, what are the other little pieces? They go by a term called riders, and riders are what kind of creates the full policy. Again, some of the phrases on this list will be changing as of May 1st, but every company has money sitting somewhere. I call it the pool. Kind of think of like the plastic kiddie pools that we put our toddlers in our front yards. Everybody has money sitting somewhere. And this is the money that we have access to moving forward as our incomes ascend. If we get a different job and have a different group benefit, that we can access without giving additional medical underwriting. So part of every policy is something called medical underwriting. It's incredibly intrusive. Depending on how much benefit you're asking for, you may have to give up some bodily fluids. You absolutely have to answer a million questions a million times. They have access to your medical records, your pharmaceutical records, your motor vehicle records. You only want to go through that process one time. And what this allows you to do is get additional coverage just based on proof of income. They have different triggering events. There are different maximum participation limits. Right now, every carrier will get people up to a $20,000 a month benefit should the math warrant it. Some will get people up to $30,000. When you're in training, everybody qualifies for the same packet. It's a $5,000 a month benefit. Some carriers have increased it recently to $6,000. If you are within 6 months of graduating or 6 months to 2 years into your new job, again, depending on carrier, everybody qualifies for $7,500 a month. Once you go past that time, the game changes. The way that the carriers will dictate how much benefit you qualify for is based on internal algorithms that look at how much money do you make, what benefits do you receive from your employer, and who pays for them. Because in theory, we're not supposed to be able to be overinsured. There should be a theoretical incentive for people to get back to work. There is a benefit that goes by the name residual or partial benefit. This is a benefit that kicks in the event that you have to go part-time because of injury or illness. So it's not by choice. It varies by carrier and design as far as what is the triggering event. Some of the companies will kick in if you've lost 15% of your income. Some you have to lose 20%. And there are a multitude of definitions of how they're going to pay you back some of your losses. I will tell you, this one's really important. There are more residual and partial claims filed and paid every year rather than total. So I do think this one is super important, but you also want to make sure that they're being explained to you because it is not apples to apples. Another rider is called the cost of living adjustment, or COLA. This is supposed to be inflationary protection. So dollar today, dollar 10 years from now. This kicks in when you go on claim. So you are sick or injured, they're paying you as you hit your anniversary going into month 13, 25, 37, your benefit will actually go up based on the language in the policy. Again, varies by carrier. Some carriers have multiple options. The way that it is accrues interest can be compounded or simple. Some have a range of an up to maximum benefit. Some it's a set number. Again, not apples to apples. I wouldn't necessarily pick or not pick a company based on their cost of living adjustment, but I think it's important to understand what the differences are. There is a rider, which is additive, called the catastrophic benefit. So this is an additional benefit that you would get on top of your monthly benefit in the event that something horrible happened. If you are left unable to perform 2 or more of your activities of daily living without assistance, or you are severely cognitively impaired, essentially needing a shadow, you would get another benefit. So it becomes X plus Y, X being your monthly benefit, Y being the catastrophic benefit. It is probably the most hotly debated benefit. Personally, I'm of the ilk of I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. But truthfully, if somebody says to me, look, I'm really trying to shave cost, what's the first thing that you would get rid of? This would probably be the first thing that I would get rid of. Currently, the biggest difference between the carriers has to do with how they treat mental health and substance abuse. This too is going to change as of May 1st. But historically, carriers have not really wanted to cover physicians for the life of their policies. And depending on what state you live in, what kind of doctor you are, and the carrier, there's a multitude of options for how mental health and substance abuse gets covered. One of the things that I try to do is really put this more in a true life numbers show. And it's really easy to get caught up in the definitions and what did this stuff mean? But at the end of the day, people really want to know, okay, really, what are we amounting to? What's the difference if I do it or I don't do it? So I created 3 easy physician stories. The original assumption is we're talking about the same physician who's making $250,000 in salary with a $25,000 bonus, and their group benefit covers them for 60% of their base salary to a maximum of $6,500 a month. This was my group benefit, which I already told you I didn't get anyway. So physician A is something I hear all the time. So this is a doc who thought that 60% of their income was covered. So the full 275, right? So here's the assumption. The truth is that it maxed out at $6,500 a month, which brings us to the 78. And that doctor was unaware that because it's a group employer paid benefit, that money was going to get taxed. And so truthfully here, the take home is much less than what physician A thought it was going to be. Now, physician B is kind of where I was. I did think that 60% of my income was covered. I got a policy my first year as an attending. I didn't know about this as a resident, but I made the mistake of not keeping pace with my income. Remember that pool of money that we have access to? I never really heard from the guy who sold me my policy. And so I ended up grossly underinsured. But again, here you can see the math, right? So there's a very big difference between what's assumed and what is a true take home. But physician B in a better position than physician A. And lastly, we have physician C, who has been properly educated and followed through their career and really understood what they had. And this doctor is going to be bringing in pretty close to what they were making as a clinician. So big difference. If you remember, physician A was only bringing home $62,000 a year. Physician C, almost 192. It's a really big difference. And I will tell you that the first 3 years of my leaving medicine were probably the hardest, but knowing that we had enough income coming in that we didn't have to sell our house, we didn't have to pull our kids from school, was incredibly comforting. Now, if I had kept pace with my income, I'd be in a much different position. Now, one of the things I really like to touch on when I'm speaking with residents and fellows are some of the roadblocks that we run into, not infrequently, so that if this is a concern right now, that better behavior follows after the talk. These are really the 3 big ones that we run into on a regular basis. I remember being a resident and barely having time to eat or go to the bathroom. Finding time to go to my doctor's, it just fell by the wayside. And it's really easy to turn to your co-resident and say, hey, I can't get to my doctor. Can you just write my script for me? Or thinking, oh, I have a medical license now, I can just call this in. Self-prescribing is one of the few things that will actually make you uninsurable. There are kind of red flag medications, antidepressants, anxiolytics, sleep agents, narcotics, weight loss drugs, ADHD meds, high dose steroids, and infertility medications. If you are currently writing your own prescriptions, please stop and make sure that you get a primary care physician, a therapist, a psychiatrist to actually do the prescribing. The companies want to see 2 years of good behavior before that they will think about covering somebody who has self-prescribed the medications that I just listed. If you have a friend who says, hey, can you write me X? And this isn't the one-off for a Z-Pak or, Cipro for a UTI. This is, again, the same meds that I just mentioned. The first thing that you should be asking your friend is, do you have a private disability policy? If the answer is no, you should tell them you're doing them a favor by not writing the prescription. There has to be a paper trail when the companies do their pharmacy search and certain medications come up, then they're going to reach out for medical records. And if there are no medical records to back up the meds that you're taking, that can lead to you not being able to get covered. I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but I will. Once you have a private policy in place, go nuts. Nothing's going to change. You want a policy that is automatically renewable and non-cancelable. Once you go through underwriting, they've made you an offer, you're paying your premium, they can't change the policy. But until you have a policy in place, please, please, please do not do either of those things. I'm going to focus on women's health for a minute. The carriers won't admit it out loud, but they really don't like covering pregnancy. And disability insurance is actually more expensive for women than it is for men. The opposite is true for life insurance. It's more expensive for men than women. It's not entirely as sexist as it seems. Women do historically leave all fields more often than men because of injury or illness. Men historically die younger and more successfully at their own hands. So that's where the price gradient comes from. They are not very nice when it comes to pregnancy issues. And we know there's plenty of literature that women who put off family planning for education, for jobs, have a higher risk of infertility and need for assisted reproductive technology. If you have had a miscarriage within 12 months of an application, they will not cover future pregnancies. If you have had gestational diabetes, if you've had preeclampsia, the list is a mile long of things that can happen in pregnancy. They will not cover future pregnancies. When I started doing this, all C-sections resulted in an exclusion for future pregnancy coverage. And I kind of went nuts because I make breech babies, more information than you need to know, but it's standard of care in the United States. No one anywhere is voluntarily doing vaginal breaches. Some hospitals, you can't do vaginal twins. I have since been able to get all of the carriers to at least look at why somebody had a C-section. And sometimes the way that the exclusion is written is for complications of future cesarean sections, not global pregnancy. Same thing with the use of assisted reproductive technologies. Plenty of times in my practice where somebody had Clomid or had their first pregnancy through IVF, and all of a sudden their uterus is primed and their next pregnancy is spontaneous. When I started, if you had seen an REI doc, if the word infertility was anywhere in your medical records, pregnancy in the future was not covered. We now have a couple of carriers where the language is specific to infertility treatments and or IVF. So in the event that you have a spontaneous pregnancy, that pregnancy would actually get covered. So keep in mind that really all women should be getting their first policy in place before they try to get pregnant the first time. It's so important to have pregnancies covered. Pregnancy complications account for about 6 to 8% of claims every year. Screening tests, pap smears, mammograms, you need to make sure that you are up to date. An abnormal pap smear will lead to an exclusion of your cervix until you've had 2 negative pap smears. Mammograms, they want to see normal testing. I know a ton of women get diagnosed with fibroadenomas in adolescence, early adulthood. They will often lead to an exclusion of covering your breasts. So really important also just that you're keeping up with current guidelines and discussing those tests with whomever you speak with about disability insurance.
Okay, everyone. I think Stephanie is having some troubles here, so I'll go ahead and give her a couple minutes. I know she was having problems with her building and power, so we'll go ahead and give her a couple minutes to try to get logged back on.
Am I back on?
Yes, you are.
I'm really embarrassed about tonight. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Well, let me get back to here. Um,
Again, if anyone has any questions throughout this, I am monitoring the Q&A, so go ahead and put those in the Q&A or the chat, and Stephanie will get with you on those at the end of this presentation.
I'm not sure where I fell off, and yes, I'm sitting in the dark, but my computer had a backup. So BMI is one of the few things that adds cost to these policies. You can be too big or too small. I have recently picked this as my new advocacy space. We know that certain cultures are constitutionally small, and it really bothers me that some people are being charged more when we know that the old BMI charts were based on Caucasian European men. So that is my most recent fight. And really, it comes down to what is the cost. I will be the first to tell you that just because you qualify for $5,000 a month doesn't mean that you need to purchase the full $5,000. And people seem to be surprised when I say that. Cost is factored into by many things. The younger you are, the better. Again, I mentioned females cost more than males. It is based on state. It is based on type of physician. We are all broken up into what's called an occupation class, which is the carrier's internal dialogue of what's your risk of going out on claim. It should not come as a surprise that emergency medicine docs are going to be paying more for their policies than, say, a pediatrician, right? And so these are factors that go into it. And most importantly, during training, just about every company has trainee discounts that once you capture that discount, it stays with you for the life of the policy. So it amounts to thousands and thousands of dollars in savings over the life of the policy. That if you waited until you were attending to get a policy, those discounts may not be open to you. And so if somebody says to me, this is really expensive, I really can't budget it right now, I get it. I lived paycheck to paycheck as a resident. Some of the companies will let you go as low as $1,000 a month in monthly benefit. And that may cost you, less than $100 a month, even lower. And so there are ways to kind of reverse engineer stuff to make it palatable while you're in training, that gets your foot in the door, that gets you the best coverage, right? Because typically as we age, we get more morbid, things happen. And so you really want to get this done the youngest, the healthiest, the earliest in training. And again, please, women, absolutely before the first time you try to get pregnant. So in conclusion, as I mentioned, now is really the time to do it. Absolutely before you graduate training, but we want to capitalize on the fact that you are probably the youngest and healthiest that you're going to be. And now I can open it up for questions.
Okay, so I noticed there's one in the Q&A box for you. I don't know if you can see it or not, so I'll just read it for you. Johnson wants to know if there are such things as basic versus enhanced riders and what are the differences?
So those two terms typically are in relation to that residual or partial benefit. Some of the companies have different tiers of the same rider. And again, it depends on the carrier. Most of them will have one. Some of them will have just a basic or an enhanced. One of the companies who changed their product recently now has a basic, an enhanced, and an enhanced plus. What's different about those definitions? Number one is how it gets triggered. So remember when I mentioned that some of those trigger at a 15% loss of income, some trigger at a 20% loss of income. Those definitions will also dictate how you get paid back. So oftentimes the basic language will maybe not have a maximum benefit. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. With the enhanced, typically in the first 3 months, 6 months of a residual or partial claim, the benefit will be no less than, say, 50% of your monthly benefit. With the basic definitions, oftentimes it's just straight percentages. The enhanced plus now, it changes on the 3 month. So the first 3 months, the company will pay you back dollar for dollar up to your maximum benefit. Months 4, 5, and 6, the benefit won't be any lower than 50% of the benefit. And then after month 6, it goes to straight percentages. And what I mean by straight percentages is percent of income lost equals percent of benefit received. It's not to make you whole. It's to help bridge the gap. So I realize that was a lot for a short question, but it goes back to the whole idea that there's no standardization in language, and it really depends on the carrier.
Okay. And there's another question, a couple more. I'm just going to go down the list for you.
Yeah, please.
If I am a third-year internal medicine resident and plan to work as a hospitalist a year or so before applying for fellowship, will the occupation definition change once I change specialties? Or would it be better to sign up once I am a fellow?
So this is a great question. And typically you're going to pay less as an IM resident than you would depending on the fellowship. Some of the fellowships are classed the same, but my recommendation would be to get it before you finish training. And then you would kind of make a decision if how long, right? If you're just going to be a hospitalist for a year or so before you go back, you may decide not to increase the coverage as an attending and kind of keep it at, the resident level. But you would have the opportunity, if you wanted, to max out your coverage and then technically be a little bit overinsured when you go back to fellowship. But most of the fellowships are going to have a more expensive occupational class than internal medicine or general surgery.
Okay. And then what's the names of specialty specific insurance companies for physicians?
So as I mentioned, there are currently 6: Principal, Emeritus, Mass Mutual, Standard, Guardian, and Ohio National. Ohio National is leaving the individual space as of May 1st. So they all offer specialty-specific coverage, specifically catering to physicians and other healthcare folks.
Okay. And then why not get enhanced everything? Well, this is from Johnson again, kind of
Yep.
piggybacking on the last question. Why not get enhanced everything? Doesn't that make the most sense? Also, you mentioned about certain definitions experiencing after some years.
So in my humble opinion, I do want everyone to get the enhanced definitions. Some people opt not to for cost savings. I see our job as giving people their options, right? I always talk about leading with education. We want people to make informed decisions. When we show illustrations, we do show enhanced, but we'll talk about what your other options are. And that's one of those things where somebody might say, what's the difference in cost once I've built up some wealth, right? Sometimes people make those decisions. Now, the definitions expiring after some years, I'm not 100% sure about that question. I know that there are certain expiration dates to riders, in that, remember that the pool of money, some of them you can access the money until you're 50, some it's until you're 55. And those potentially fall off at that point. There is a rider that personally I don't actually recommend, but some of the carriers have student loan repayment options, but they're term riders, meaning it's on your policy for the first 5 or 10 years. And once you hit that 5 or 10 year mark, if you're still happy, healthy, and intact, that goes away. And so it's typically an expensive rider that, unless you really get hurt or sick early in your career, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
Okay, I don't have any other questions in the Q&A box, but I do want to thank everyone for attending tonight. And Stephanie, thank you for presenting. Sorry for any
Pleasure.
inconveniences tonight. I do have an email typed out ready for you guys to be sent after this with my information and Stephanie's. If you guys have any other questions, you can email one of us from that email. So
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I
You're welcome.
apologize for the technical difficulties.
No, you're fine. Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.